you go to the supermarket and you see some candles and you can get something. But Kierkegaard tries to remind us that the very idea of someone being a god and a man at the same time, he calls it an offense. It is an offense to our. He doesn't mean that to criticize it.
Correct.
But he said, it's an offense to our reason. Mm-hmm. And until we feel, of course, he wants to try to get people to sort of believe in that book, which is, of course, not anything like what I'm doing here. But I think the idea of remembering that figure is an extreme figure in and of itself, himself, mm-hmm. capital H or no, is maybe something that I'm getting at here, right? Blue hair, red hair, whatever it might be. It's
it could be anyone.
It's a shock.
It's an extreme image.
It's a shock, yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to read now? Or?
Yeah, sure. So that one, I guess I should tell people that second poem I read was from my first book. I went back to my first book, which is called Fugue for Other Hands. Yeah, I don't know if you had anything particular in mind. Let's look. Should I read one of these sort of middle-length ones that we were just talking about?
Of course.
Okay, so I'll give a little introduction. I don't know if you want to. It might be a good time to mention tomorrow.
Oh yes, and tomorrow, Professor Fasano, Joe here, is going to be reading in the periodicals room at the Manhattanville Library tomorrow at 7. And I understand you're going to have some photography that will respond to the poems.
Yeah, because it's the other way around. So I've written a couple poems in this maybe 3 poems, 4 actually, in this second book, Inheritance, that are ekphrastic poems, and the poetry students on campus will know what that is. It's a poem that responds to a work of visual art. And in this case, I've got one poem in the book that responds to Kevin Carter's haunting photograph of a vulture that has landed behind a starving child in Sudan in the early 90s. I have this poem that I'll read now, and we'll be using the photographs. We'll be projecting them, so people will be able, if they come to the reading tomorrow at 7, I'll be able to take a look at the photographs as I'm reading. This one is a photograph by Tom Stoddard that was taken in 1992, and the title of the photograph really tells you everything you need to know about the story. It's a young mother and child awaiting evacuation from Sarajevo. It's a powerful image, and she's just holding him on her hip and understanding that they have to, they might not see each other again. Yeah.
Something looming just as much as that vulture.
Yeah, well said, very well said. But of course, the poem is, I don't want to say the poem is a springboard to start talking about other things. The photograph is a springboard to start talking about other things, but it does sort of happen that way. The last thing you want to do is take that image, which is of somebody's pain, especially the vulture watching the starving child, and appropriate it and make it a sort of a metaphor for, I don't know, your heart dragging itself through the wilderness. These are moral considerations.
Exactly.
So it's very complicated, but but the poem still needs to allow itself to. Certainly, what it doesn't want to do is just describe, or seek to explain. So this does take that as a genesis and begin to become a meditation on the mother, I think, and on poetry.
Okay.
Maybe we shouldn't say it this way, but only dignity is endless. In Stoddard's photograph, the young mother has pinched her tongue between her pursed lips, tilted her head to one side, as though to ask her century, some petulant step-cousin who has stepped onto the family furniture, to come down, won't you, be good now. It is only April. I would like to say the child she's lifted on her left hip is not staring as only the doomed can do through us, not staring for the least scrap of an answer on Stoddard's face in last light. I would like to say he is not, in whatever constitutes the dim mind of a 4-year-old refugee, trying to piece together the story he witnessed this morning. A few shadows barging in to lift his father from his bowl of soup, shadows that swatted the bowl away and made the father stoop down to kiss his own bare furniture in his own dark house. and then something else, something iron. A father whose jacket the child is wearing now, of whom the stain says everything, of whom the mother's face is no testament at all. But this is not a story about wisdom. This is not even a story of how I looked through the window of a dead friend's home during a war once and listened all night to a river in my own country falling. How it told nothing, and still does, and always will. All afternoon I've carried the panes of a house out through its threshold and laid them in hawkweed, pursed my breath to their bodies until a single ghostly handprint, now two, now a dozen, rise up like fixed stars on the earth again, and have lain down among them while they vanish. First thaw, orchards blossom. Tonight I lie between the panes of a lost house and think of the river with its thin skin of petals, open and wordless and bare. In a story I have always loved, Christ is leaning over the body of a cripple, waking in the sun spray of Bethesda, and their eyes are the dark olive of that nation. Take up your bed, he whispers. Be whole. And he is crippled again by the splendor and the brevity of his wonder. All my life, I thought I loved the stories of redemption for their surrender, their simplicity, for the way we rise before the gasping onlookers, raptors turning in the thermals, our thin muscles creaking with neglect, the brilliance of poverty around us. All my life I thought I worshipped the way the breaker would whisper to those horses as he held them to the ground as they broke down, red wings exploding from a far field, an odor of lilac and thyme. I see now, waking is the nation of our banishment. I see now, you have to fight for it, compassion. Once, in Rome, where I'd gone to surrender a decade, I watched a girl press her brow into the dust and pigeon mire of the Piazza della Repubblica, and lifting her hands over her head in the form of an earthen nest, call out all morning for mercy. It was autumn. It was not light. Paolo, she asked, and though you have no reason to believe it, though I would abandon you too, for a moment I believed in language. Believed we can own the story of our lives, lead ourselves into communion by the bridle. And I walked on. Tonight I lie out in this yard and think of severance, its fire. I think of Stoddart staring into the eyes of the dispossessed, taking their hands from his own hand, the better to have witnessed them, like Lincoln lifting his son's body from the tomb while the Union lies down in its twin wolves, like Booth in the arms of the fire, like these stars, these resigning stars, like the way Jose Silva in that prophetic century lifted his doctor's fingers to ask, Donde, padre, meaning the heart, el corazón, el madre. The way the healer, knowing nothing of the pistol, of the life's work in the depths of the harbor, only lifted his penknife through the evening and crooned, Aquí, mi hijo. The way the patient stumbled back again through his city, a drawing of his own heart on his body, carrying it out of habit with great care. How he lay down in the dark of his hovel with the pistol fresh polished in his fingers. How, in the version of the story I have not loved, he did nothing. He only rose up through the first light, only stumbled in bewilderment through the alleys until he found her, a poor voice in the wilderness, a figure he had hurried past each morning, a woman, a stranger in the ruins. And he held her, 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 and was whole again, and wrote none of it down. The ending mentions the poet Jose Silva, Jose Asuncion Silva, who's a rather tragic story. He sort of lost his some manuscripts that he'd been working on. He was a young man. I think he was in his late 20s. I should know, but I think he was in his late 20s. And He ended up killing himself, but it's this very poignant story. He